20th, 1968, 200,000 Warsaw Pact troops and 5,000 tanks were sent by the Soviet Union to invade Czechoslovakia. This began the event called the Prague Spring.
Prior to this, the Soviet Union was beginning to feel threatened by the steps of the democratic advancement in Czechoslovakia.
Leonid Brezhnev, a Soviet Union politician, threatened Dubček, the leader of Czechoslovakia, about an invasion months prior, but Dubček dismissed them and continued the country's democratic advancement.
Months later, on August 20th, 1968, Brezhnev followed through on his threats and invaded Czechoslovakia.
Tanks were bombarded with petrol bombs.
These petrol bombs were called Molotov cocktails and were often made by civilians.
This ultimately killed 130 civilians and wounded 500.
In a turn of events, the Czechoslovakian civilians started to protest. They began with non-violent acts and peaceful protests to try to avoid more conflict. However, under Stalin's control, there was not much they could do.
This is an example of some of the Czechoslovakian civilian protests and the Soviet Union.
Czech doesn't want war. Yeah, we want peace. This was devastating to Czechoslovakia and not to mention the USA and Britain because at this point communism was advancing quickly and taking over the world.
This event in history is called the Prague Spring and was a huge success within the Soviet Union in their steps toward making Europe completely communist.
However, Czechoslovakia pulled through with events like the Action Program, which promised democratic elections in Czechoslovakia in the future. The Brezhnev Doctrine, created by Brezhnev, their new leader, declared that the USSR could intervene in affairs in any Eastern European nation if the rise and spread of communism was threatened.
At this point, Czechoslovakia was in a very difficult situation. They were alone and had no help. Communism was taking over the world, and there wasn't really much that anyone could do about it.
Years later, Leonid Brezhnev became the Prime Minister of Russia in 1972 and took over with his anti-American and anti-democratic views.
These events are similar to the events in Hungary in 1956 because they both resulted in a long-standing resentment. Communism was a huge issue in both. Both countries wanted to reduce communism, and both were involved in protests.
Thanks for watching, and tune in next week.